and welcome to ET Auto and to another edition of Target Net Zero, an exclusive discussion series with industry leaders and industry experts, where we discuss about the automotive stroke mobility industry's journey towards becoming greener and the ways and means it is adopting or should adopt towards to reach the ultimate goal of carbon neutrality. Our guest in this episode of the show is someone who is an industry veteran, a technocrat, an academic, and also an author of a book titled Faster, Smarter, Greener, Future of the Car and Urban Mobility. He, by the way, also is a licensed pilot and possesses a FIA racing driver's license. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about Dr. V. Sumantran, who is the chairman of Celeris Technologies. Dr. Sumantran, welcome to this show.
It's always a delight to speak to you, Sumantran. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure as well. So to start off this discussion, which I'm sure our viewers would find it very valuable. My first question to you is, Dr. Sumantran, the scenario that we are in. We heard the UN calling it Code Red for humanity. And within that, the kind of contributors to the mess or the challenges that we are in, transportation included. Transportation, as we know, accounts for about a fifth of the global CO2 emissions. And within that transportation pie, road travel accounts for about 3/4 of them. So in such a scenario, what are the most urgent measures you think the stakeholders should take?
So, Sumantran, as you know, I always like to start with the big picture, and let me start with the fact that today, and particularly over the last 200 years, the acceleration of human activity on the planet has been completely unimaginable. And this preponderance of human activity is fundamentally the source of what we are talking about, which is carbon intensity and the objective, the need to get to a net zero situation. It so happens that so much of life and activity is carbon dependent. And so what we've been really doing particularly over the last 200 years, is accelerating the rate with which we are depleting carbon reserves, essentially from the soil, the fossils, natural gas, and all those sources of carbon. And we are very rapidly burning it up and dumping it in the atmosphere. And this is completely an unsustainable imbalance of what should be a natural carbon balance in any evolution of life. So clearly we have an imperative, therefore, to deal with this. And core to this is the way we live and the nature of our activity. So now let's get down to mobility. Yes, I think anytime people try to solve a problem like this, we even tried to deal with this even as far back as when the Kyoto Protocol was being written up. You can't solve a problem of this size without what are called multiple slices of the problem. So we have to look at all ways in which we can tackle the problem. And some of it will start with, for instance, avoidance. Can we avoid some travel? The second is, if there is travel to be incurred, can we find a way to lessen the carbon footprint of the travel? And then where there is carbon emissions absolutely necessary or unavoidable, can we find ways to mitigate it or reuse it in some form or the other? So these are very fundamental prescriptions of how we might want to do. But to illustrate the problem, let's take the average typical format of mobility. In India, it would be the average person being a 65-kilogram adult, usually sitting, even if it's in a compact car, a car that weighs 1,300 kilograms. And you're moving this entire package of a 65-kilogram person sitting in a 1,300-kilogram car, and we say that's mobility. In the US, interestingly, it's very similar. A 165-pound human adult in a 3,300-pound average US car. So there's something fundamentally wrong in how we think we have crafted mobility solutions. So it has to start with rethinking what we're doing in the broadest context of mobility.
There's an opportunity for industry players to also look at different form factors. We have already seen in some areas the emergence of pods as a means of transport. Therefore, does it also lend this challenge itself lends itself as an opportunity? So in that, if yes, how should industry players go about it?
So again, I will start with the first approach. We have seen through this COVID pandemic across the world how very effectively, I mean, we are conducting this discussion with you and I sitting several thousand kilometers apart. We have seen through this entire COVID pandemic how people have been able to shrink the physical distance that separates us in virtual medium. In fact, there was a wonderful book written in 1998 by a Cambridge professor and author called Francis. The title of the book was The Death of Distance. Basically, the thesis was with digital technologies and tools, we will collapse distance and we will find this way of communicating. Now, it didn't happen for 20 years because there was all sorts of hurdles in overcoming this, shall I say, level of comfort with communicating. But all of a sudden, COVID forced us to deal with it. So first element is there a way that people can avoid travel? In which case, is there a less carbon intensive way to communicate? That's number one. Number two, when you have to travel, how can you find ways of mitigating the carbon footprint? You make a very good point. Pods. There is an interesting, movement, a great deal of attraction to what we call micromobility. I mean, you could even think of the Lime and the Bird scooters in many Western capitals, where it doesn't take more than a little skateboard with a little handle to say, I can move a person. And from there, all the way to various form factors of microcars and scooters and so on. There, what we're really doing is shrinking the envelope of the vehicle and saying, I don't need the 1,300 kilogram mass to move this human being. I can shrink that envelope. And it's a very important way of doing it. But remember, we've been doing this for ages in a different way. The double-decker bus in London is another form of saying, instead of shrinking the unit, I'm just saying, let's put 40 people in the bus or 60 people in the bus and move the bus along. So in each of these, there are many ways in which we can say, can we reduce the carbon intensity of the kind of travel that we have? Lastly, to some extent also depends upon the way we live. India, again, is particularly at a very crucial stage of development. We are seeing massive metro cities expand almost without control, without plan. This urban sprawl is going to mean that each one of us is going to commute much longer for affecting the same outcomes or having the same quality of life. And therein itself is another big problem, which is what we have discussed a lot in the book. Now, when you look at a city like Paris, they're talking about how they want to re-architect Paris into clusters, and they want to call it the 15-minute city. So they want to have suburbs. Saint-Denis may be a suburb, and they will have people living there, working there, shopping there, entertaining there. And they very seldom would have to come to the other parts of Paris unless it's for some exceptional need. So you cut down the amount of travel that's required by urban architecture design. So all of these are going to have to be taken on if we want to, in a systematic way, address this goal of net zero.
The urbanization trend is on the rise, and it is estimated that about 60% of the world's population would live in cities by the turn of this decade, that is 2030, and up from about 55 or 54 odd percent in 2016. In such a scenario, what kind of changes do you expect in urban mobility? Or let me put it this way, is it time that urban planners in central and state government organizations give more weightage in planning for mobility in large cities like Chennai, you are not joining this show from, and Mumbai, where I'm conducting this show from?
No, definitely it makes an important point. I mean, Transport for London, as an umbrella organization that manages transportation in the City of London, has indeed moved towards this. They have adopted this idea that we want people to travel most effectively, with the lowest carbon footprint, with the lowest cost, with the greatest amount of convenience. And this means allowing for a very heterogeneous combination of modes of travel. So you bike some distance, you take a subway, or you catch a bus, and you have so many modes that can essentially help you get from A to B, with the goal of lower cost, lower carbon footprint, better convenience, and so on. So certainly cities are doing this. We're seeing other cities where, as they have done in London as well, discourage the use of cars because they impose congestion fee or a user fee for people who want to drive the car into the center of the city. Singapore is an example, London is an example. Now, this concern, this interest about how we will even plan our urban environments and how will we link the urban architecture to the mobility architecture is not just something that city planners are alone worried about. In fact, a company like Toyota, a core automotive player, is actually extremely interested in this topic. And they've got a very elaborate working experiment in Japan where they have practically a city experiment where they're looking at how the combination of urban architecture, technologies, and mobility solutions and mobility architecture can all play together to deliver the kind of outcomes that we're talking about. So I think the urban environment is, of course, extremely important in how we deal with mobility. Of course, in terms of actually executing this, there will be a number of technologies, and I'm sure we'll get into talking about the role of energy sources, renewable energy, electric vehicles. All of these are components, building blocks of the solution that would have to go in the whole system.
Right. And just before we move to technology, staying with the urban scenario, what perhaps maybe is thinkable or executable in a Paris or a Tokyo, in India, in any of the cities in India, maybe it may be almost an impossible task, or maybe at best quite challenging. So in this Indian scenario, what would you suggest? What kind of focus should the authorities should have, and in partnership with the industry maybe?
It's a very interesting observation globally. We think that if you have a very old city that has grown over many, many decades, if not centuries, that city's architecture is not flexible to kind of deal with the kind of solution that we're talking about. Frankly, it is indeed those cities that have adapted well to a focus on how to move people and how to house people more effectively. The counterpoint is, if you take cities, particularly the US, like Los Angeles or Houston, newer cities where mostly cities that grew after the advent of the auto industry, they have actually today got the most inflexible architecture, urban architecture, in terms of getting to carbon net zero. So the reason it has worked, you take the City of London, some of the streets, some of the roads in London go back to the Roman period, which is almost 2,000 years ago. So if London, leaving intact elements of its urban architecture that go back 2,000 years, can advance to a modern format of a city that works very efficiently or is working efficiently with transportation, I don't think it should deter us. Now, there is the issue of investment. There is this issue of resources that we will bring to bear. I think this is certainly something that we in India have to worry about. We are fortunately seeing a period when both national investments in urban renewable, national investments in highway and urban mobility transportation projects, the number of metros and subway projects across India, 23 cities are right now engaging with metro construction. And indeed, global institutions, whether it's the World Bank or other institutions that are eager to fund this, the Japanese are working very closely with India to fund some of this. So I think we will get help with some of the resources that we need on top of what the government is already doing. And I think we have to learn from some of the experiences of other older cities. But you said something very, very important early in your introduction. Policy is a very important. Policies and regulations are a very important component in helping us achieve these goals. So we have to make sure that it's not just the technological solutions that we're thinking about, but how do they go hand in hand with the policies and regulations needed to get what we want.
Dr. Sumantran, in the city where I'm sitting in, we are witnessing the construction of a metro network, and we are also witnessing the replacement of diesel and CNG public transport buses with battery electric buses. Let's now shift track the discussion to technologies. Is electric, or specifically battery electric, the silver bullet to the answer to the challenge of the problem of pollution and environment degradation that we're witnessing?
So again, like we said earlier, I would not want to look for a single silver bullet. I think we need a portfolio of solutions. We need a portfolio of technologies and mobility modes to be able to solve the problem. But very clearly, electrification is going to be one very important solution, a component of the solution. And of course, the core reason is it is conducive to being fed with growing fractions of renewable energy sources. Today, yes, the basket of sources that constitute our grid today is predominantly still coal or fossil fuel based. But we are seeing even in India a period when there is an acceleration of addition of renewable power capacity coming from a combination of wind, solar, and potentially, hopefully soon, rooftop solar. So we would have very significant additions of renewable sources in the total basket of energy sources. And as we start to get there, electricity or electric mobility makes a lot of sense because you're literally feeding off a renewable power source. And of course, the reason is we're able to store it in batteries. Yes, battery technology has evolved rapidly in the last 10 years. It will continue to evolve rapidly. And there will be other solutions as well. I mean, we will even talk down the road about green hydrogen, many other opportunities for us to tap energy pathways to get us to the goal of net zero and low carbon transport architecture.
As one of the options, because if that technology goes beyond the labs and into, let's say, a commercialization stage, and if it reaches that stage, you would need little or nothing to do at the powertrain level in terms of changing its architecture or changing the composition or the nature of the powertrain.
For which?
For synthetic fuels or e-fuels, as they are also called.
Well, synthetic fuels, again, will be one more element in this whole basket of energy sources. But synthetic fuels, again, have to go back to where they are produced from. With hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen, the advantage is that we can again tap renewable energy sources to provide the basic, to fuel the production of hydrogen. When you get into synthetic fuels, as long as we're still going to deal with complex fuel molecules that have carbon and nitrogen and hydrogen and all of these chemicals, the core issue is going to be where and how we're going to produce it. And both the production process and the subsequent use process, by which I mean combustion, must both be conducive to this kind of low carbon goal that we talk about. So I still would feel more comfortable with saying, at least in our current state of knowledge, electric vehicles with battery electrics are probably something that we know best how to leverage in the current environment. We are learning and acquiring skills to tap and manage green hydrogen. It's still something that we are working on. But these would provide, with known knowledge and known technologies, easier access to the goals of the low carbon transport that we're looking for.
Dr. Sumantran, when you talk about carbon neutrality, when you talk about sustainability, it's not only the fuel technology or the powertrain technology. There are other factors also which contribute towards reduction of carbon emission. For example, connected vehicle technologies, which will enhance the flow, traffic flow in cities and even on highways, and enhance efficiency, reduce emissions. So in such a scenario, for the Indian industry, do you think there's a good scope of really be of a global standard when it comes to technological capabilities and scale, both in terms of software engineering as well as hardware engineering?
No, very much. There is certainly reason to have a lot of hope and confidence. When things move to more system technologies operated by software, operated by systems, and now increasingly people use the buzzwords of AI and machine learning algorithms to help orchestrate both the machine itself and the machine in the system. All of this taps into a lot of skills and talent that we have in plenty in India. So I think we have reason to be optimistic and be hopeful of how we can be a bigger contributor to progress in the years to come. But having said that, I think there is a lot of work for us to do still to move so much of our population, to bring them to be capable of being harnessed in this new economy. And furthermore, apart from looking at their own, the opportunity to provide them with a good quality of life, to make sure that the entire system therefore still operates in a very sustainable way. So we have a long way to go, but as systems get, I mean, look at today in India, we've got a lot of smart city initiatives across so many of our cities. Yes, they all have a long way to go. They're all, piecemeal, but there is an intent to endow our cities with a combination of sensors, generation of data, and using that data to orchestrate, whether it's movement, whether it is sanitation, whether it is healthcare. So I think we can have reason to hope that the future will be one where India will have many more opportunities, and indeed Indian young people and talent will have many more opportunities to be important players in the progress.
Dr. Sumantran, the relationship between vehicle OEM and tier one suppliers have evolved over the years, and now in this disruptive era, it's no longer a customer-supplier or relationship. It's about collaboration or partnership. In such a scenario, do you think there's a strong case for Indian tier ones, I'm talking about Indian organizations, to really step up efforts to build proprietary technological capabilities? Because so far, initially it was built to print, and then we saw a wave of technology licensing or joint ventures to get access to technology. But do you think now it's high time that they invest in proprietary technologies and have technological capabilities to be able to compete in the global scale as well?
Definitely. I think here there is going to be an important role for ambition, aspiration, not so much for the people, but also for the leadership. I would only look at two very interesting sources for inspiration. I mean, we all talk in this country about the role that ISRO has played to the point where they're now becoming one of the lowest cost satellite launch platforms available in the world. And this is something that we have built up in the country with capability, and we are essentially becoming more and more important players in this whole satellite launch business globally. After a lot of struggle through a rather convoluted journey, we're now beginning to find that the so-called light combat aircraft, the HAL Tejas, is now being considered as an important export opportunity. In fact, Malaysia is looking at acquiring small format fighter jets, and they're very seriously looking at the HAL Tejas with a very modern cockpit with modern electronics and modern weapon systems. So I think if India can play a role in these spheres, making automotive technologies pales in the kind of challenge that they offer. So that's not the issue. But to be an important part of the global automotive supply chain requires sustained investment in not just the technologies and products, but also marketing and market presence. And this is some commitment that we have to make. I would also, use the opportunity to point to, in some cases, particularly our two-wheeler manufacturers, Bajaj and TVS, for example. They have taken the game very effectively to many global markets, and they're proving in some global markets that we are a better alternative to even lower cost Chinese products. So I think if we put our mind to it and if we sustain the effort, I think we can be a bigger player globally from the automotive tier one space.
You have also donned the hat of an investor. So if I were to ask you, in the current scenario, which technology basket or baskets would you put your money on?
Well, I can't claim to be a very successful modern investor because, frankly, some of the modern valuations boggle the mind, and I don't know how this.
Some of them may be defined.
Yeah, and maybe it calls for a different level of assumption of the ingredients into an enterprise and and how it's handed over to somebody else and the timing and all of that. So I won't get into all of that because it's part of the business that I can't claim to be very familiar with. But I would go back to fundamentals. One fundamental is India is a country where, just with our demographic dividend, the young population that we have, the kind of education and exposure that this population is receiving is a huge opportunity. You can't hold down this large population. So I would certainly bet on this as one factor. The second factor I would bet on is, as a world, as a globe, as a planet, we will have to make do with fewer resources. Anybody who has a more intelligent, more effective way of delivering goals with lesser resources is going to be endowed with huge advantages. So carbon is one example. Anybody who has a more efficient way of achieving mobility, whether it is electric mobility, whether it is hydrogen, whether it is micro-mobility formats, these will all have an important opportunity for growth. And finally, I think as society evolves, we will probably be increasingly worried about personal well-being. Already we've seen this in COVID. So there's a whole area which, frankly, I'm absolutely not qualified to comment on, but this whole business of wellness, healthcare, and medicine, where again, India has a huge opportunity. These are areas to bet on. But again, I can claim to be perplexed by moderate valuations, but I do believe that when you bet on the fundamentals, you likely will come out ahead in the long term.
Dr. Sumantran, we are nearing the end of this episode of the show, but I have to ask you this. You also enjoy an outing once in a while at the racetrack, in the race circuit. With the evolution of the automotive industry, do you think the days of the V8, V12s are gone, the excitement of that, or do you think the top characteristics of the electric vehicle will be able to kind of at least compete with them? Or do you think these are totally, many purists believe that no, there is no way an electric vehicle will be able to give that similar experience?
No, I think ever since human civilization invented the wheel, our goal has been how to make it go faster. So whether it was rolling the simple wheel down the hill, there's been this obsession, this passion, this interest in making it go faster. And I don't think anything will take away from that. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that in the early 1960s, the Formula One format involved small cars with 1.5 liter engines. And they provided acute competition, as interesting challenges, and they created so many world-class world champions: Jim Clark, Jackie Stewart, Graham Hill. I mean, the racing, the competition then was no less intense than what it is today. So I'm quite confident that you can substitute formats, you can substitute power sources, but we will continue to find ways to be competitive. At the end of the day, it's like an Olympic sport. It's a man or a woman and the machine, and we're trying to orchestrate the performance and maximize the outcomes. So I think that challenge will remain, and in that definition, I have no worries about whatever trajectory motor racing takes. I'm sure it will continue to be engaging and exciting.
Talking about performance cars, this energy source. Do you think the segment of the Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and Porsches, and maybe Aston Martins, that segment will be the last to bid goodbye to the gasoline powertrain?
Maybe, but it's like even today we don't use horses for transportation, but there are still people who own race horses and go out on occasions. Maybe they have pastures out in the countryside. They go ride horses. So I think there will be room for some level of human indulgence. Maybe they will be asked to pay for it, but I think there will be opportunities for us to enjoy machines. But there is underlying all of this a responsibility and an obligation to be sensitive to what the planet needs. And I think that's what's going to guide how society will move forward.
Indeed, very wise words there, Dr. Sumantran. Sensitivity to and responsibility towards what the society or what the world requires, and to kind of align our desires to the extent possible with that, and as much as possible with that requirement. Thank you very much, Dr. Sumantran. Always a pleasure having a conversation with you. This was no different, and with you, time always runs short, but thank you once again, and best wishes for the new year to you and your family, and thank you for sparing your time.
Likewise, Sumantran, thank you. Wishing you and your family all the very best in the new year, and it's always enjoyable to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and dear viewers, thank you for tuning in to this edition of Target Net Zero. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode as much as I did conducting it. So on that note, wishing you and your loved ones all the very best. Wishing you Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. On that note, goodbye, take care, and stay safe.